Well, Constantine, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm really interested in talking to you about a number of things, but to start, I'd love to hear what you think about population decline right now and kind of the dynamics with climate change and population and how we perhaps should think about that in the future.
Well, thanks, Joe, for having me today. The relationship between population and global warming and climate change in general is something that I recently started to find fascinating because I found that this topic is somehow sensitive for many people. Not talking about the fact that we might actually be too many people on our planet, at least given the current level of development of technology and everything else. And I find this disturbing, the fact that one factor that is so important in creating a sustainable environment for all of us on the planet is not discussed openly. And you might ask, what do you mean that we are too many? Uh, what I mean by, well, too many is um, if I would relate the number of people, I don't know, the population on Earth today, to how much of the Earth resources we're consuming, I would quote a number that is an index, which is called ecological footprint, which has been determined by an organization of scientists. Actually, they organize themselves in a group that deals precisely with this kind of calculation, and they coined actually this term, ecological footprint. So ecological footprint is an index, is a number that shows if all people on Earth would have the same average standard of living as we have today, then we would need 1.7 Earths to in order to live in the long term to make our living on this planet sustainable, meaning that we are now exceeding the biocapacity of Earth of regenerating its resources 1.7 times. We consume 70% more than the capacity of Earth to renew the resources in terms of food, energy, everything that we consume in terms of resources.
So is that number something that we can increase by, we mentioned in our pre-conversation like AI and energy being two things right now that are top of mind. If we're able to, through technology, be more efficient about how we produce food and how we use our resources, and we're able to optimize in some way, do you think that we could reduce the per capita resource use and be able to sustain a larger population?
That's an excellent question. Actually, before answering this question, I want to mention that this ecological footprint, which is on average 1.7, actually hides a lot of discrepancy and inequality among countries. For instance, we in developed countries like here in Canada and also in the United States, this number ecological footprint is about between 2 and 3, actually exceeds 3. Mm. So if it means that if everybody on Earth would live using resources at the rate that we are using in developed countries, then we would need not 1.7, but 3 Earths in order for our planet to be, or planets, if we had 3 Earths, will be able to renew their resources. Now, to go back to your question, to what extent technology improvements would actually allow us to be more on Earth, living at the current standard of living, again, on average. I'm saying this is a good question because the answer actually goes back to um, an 18th century economist, Robert Malthus, who was famous for predicting a doomsday, seeing that in England, actually, the population was increasing faster and actually at increasing at an increasing rate, an exponential increase, while the production of food and other resources that would be necessary for life increase only linearly. So at some point, he predicted that at some point it was going to come a day when there will be too many people and too little food. In the meantime, since that time, economists were happy to declare Malthus wrong, precisely because of advances in technology. Saying, wait, look, technology has been advancing so much that Malthus was completely wrong. So now we can provide food and everything at such a low price that it exceeds actually the growth in population. But later on, there were other economists, actually quite recent times. Well, more recently, there was actually another economist um, which was also not later than Malthus, who noticed a similar effect. Actually, a similar effect, but not quite similar, because Jevons actually took into account, looked at technology. So Malthus was not concerned about technology at all, as far as I remember from what I read about his work. But it was Jevons, William Stanley Jevons, um, who noticed also in England that although the uh, engines for trains, that were powered by coal, were becoming more and more efficient in using coal. Yet the consumption of coal in England was increasing, overall consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So this was actually called the Jevons effect, which says that the more, and now more recently it's called the rebound effect. Rebound effect says that the more efficient technology becomes, which lowers the price, so to speak, um, in quotation marks, of using a resource, right? Because you are using the resource in a more efficient way. So when the price of using a resource becomes lower by technological improvements, actually people tend to consume more of it. And overall, actually the absolute amount of consumption of that resource increases. And actually this is a good place to say now that if we look historically at humankind consumption of okay, and there's another point that I want to make related to this. I just going to note it here. Okay, so if we look at the history of humankind consumption of um, fossil fuels, initially there was only wood, right? It was not fossil, of course, but people would only use wood for heating their houses and preparing their food. But then uh, oil was discovered. Actually, it was first coal. Coal was discovered, right? And people started to use coal. Now, if we look at historical data, you see that actually when coal was discovered and started to be used at a larger and larger scale, the amount of coal has been increasing, being used, for transportation, for heating, for all kinds of things, to actually powered the Industrial Revolution in England was coal. The amount of wood that people used for energy production decreased, but just slightly. And actually, even today, wood is still used for fuel in many places. And if we look historically, wood was actually the only fuel that has been slightly decreasing over the past 2 centuries in terms of quantity that's being used. And most probably it was because it has been depleted in much part of Europe and in many other places. But the amount of coal that people have been using has been actually continuously increasing. And the discovery of oil that came later didn't actually decrease the amount of coal that people has been using. So what I'm saying that is this rebound effect is actually quite uh, uh, evident. Like we've been, once we discovered coal, we used more coal on top of wood. Then once we discovered oil, we used oil, more and more actually, on top of, at the same time, the amount of coal that we've been using has been increasing as well. So both coal and oil have been both increasing continuously. And then when gas was started to be used at large scale, the three of them started to increase at the same time. The quantity increased. So you might think, well, coal was much more energy efficient than wood, and oil is actually much more energy efficient than coal. Um, and you might think, well, then it would mean that if we have oil, we should use less coal. Well, it didn't happen. So this is the rebound effect. And what I wanted to say related to this is is the observation that when gasoline becomes cheaper, when and where it is cheaper, people use more of it. Like if gas is cheap, people here start to buy bigger cars. Now I mostly see on the highways in the city mostly SUVs and trucks, at least here in Canada, and probably it's the same in the United States. If airplane tickets are cheap, then people travel more. And overall, there is this rebound effect that in absolute terms, our consumption increases. Even if consumption per capita might be decreasing, right? When the population is increasing, the absolute levels of resources is increasing.
So if we're running up against planetary limits and it's necessary to, or we have to think about how we'll survive with an overpopulated planet. You mentioned in our pre-conversation that the starting point is just to stop encouraging population growth, but there are countries, individual interests at play that would make them not want to do that because they want to make sure that their country continues to experience the same quality of life, the same societal systems that they currently experience. How do you think about countries that are starting to experience population decline, and how they maintain kind of their own individual identity while also benefiting from reducing their carbon footprint and they're acknowledging their ecological footprint?
Yeah, that's again an excellent question, because one of my concerns or observations is that this is kind of a race among countries now, who is going to have a bigger populations to dominate the other countries. And I see this like a classical example of a prisoner's dilemma game. We
Yeah.
want to have a bigger population than you because, having a bigger population, we can build a big army. Now, imagine, for instance, if Ukraine was now not a country that had over 40 million people, as it is, but what if Ukraine was a small country like Moldova or like one of those three tiny Baltic countries? Well, wouldn't stand a chance
Mm.
against Russian aggression. So having a large population uh, is perceived by individual countries as giving them a strategic advantage from this point of view. But don't get me wrong. I mean, I want to make this very clear. Uh, I'm very much aware of uh, large populations, even large Earth population, because larger population has uh, advantages. We would say the more the merrier, but seriously, if you have a large agglomeration of people or large population in general, this deepens the markets, which means that we can specialize. This increases the pool of innovation. More brains can do better than less brains.
Mm.
The probability of a new Einstein is much higher when population is growing. Uh, it's good to have many friends. It's There are advantages in being so many of us, but each and every extra person um, above the biocapacity of our planet needs extra food, needs extra shelter, needs extra resources. And so far, we haven't found yet an energy source that would sustain a population like we are now. Sorry, your question was about, yeah, it was about what can we say about this race to increase individual countries' populations. So yeah, this is a race. Um, and I think this is not very much different than the arms race,
Mm.
which is also a prisoner's dilemma, a race to the bottom, which now actually observe is um, ongoing at a much larger scale than, I don't know, during the Cold War, right? And this is
Mm.
another thing that is kind of saddening, that because it drains even more of planet resources. So population race, yes, we can, I think, only by individual countries realizing that this is not the right thing to do to encourage increase in population. But if the population declines naturally, just let it do so. And the only policies that would be acceptable, non-coercitive, non-punishing, would be just to educate women in particular, uh, especially in poor regions, because we see well-established relationship actually between standard of living and fertility rates. In countries that are richer, people and women tend to have less children for various reasons. Um, and as opposed to what Malthus was thinking, actually the relationship is reversed. So Malthus was thinking that if you increase wages to poor people, then poor people would start to um, marry earlier and have more children, for that
Mm.
matter, and therefore um, uh, a higher standard of living would actually increase population. But actually, what we see is that in poorer countries, families tend to have more children because, again, of other various reasons that I wouldn't uh, relate now. So um, another, besides this strategic advantage that is in governments' minds of having larger populations individually within their countries, while other countries would have lower populations, right?
Mhm.
So besides this strategic advantage, there is also the truth that in the short term, if the ratio between active population and retirees is becoming lower, you have less people working that would need to provide for a larger non-working population, including elderly and children and people who don't work for other reasons.
Right.
Uh,
So how do you address that when that gap happens, when a population in a country is aging and your proportion of active population is declining, and so there's less caretakers and there's less people supporting the elderly population and the younger population. How do you navigate those years where you're you have that dynamic where you're being overwhelmed by an aging population and you don't have the active population to support it?
yeah, so it's like so this problem is like should I do something today that is kind of painful, but it doesn't kill me, in order to get healthier and live a longer and healthier life, or should I postpone what I have to do, forever, because it's too painful? Should I swallow this bitter medicine, or should I postpone it because it is bitter? This is one thing about it. But the other thing is that actually it doesn't have to be so painful. And actually here, and in this respect, is where technology actually can play an extraordinary useful role, right? If you increase um, efficiency in production, then you need less people to produce as much. And if your population doesn't increase, by the way, overall, you actually need less people to produce the same amount of GDP, goods and services that would produce more people. So technology can have AI can have a huge role here. And this is also related to the fear that AI is going to replace uh, humans and in the workplace and displace actually workers and so on. Well, why would this be a bad thing? I mean, technology over since the Industrial Revolution actually freed us from slave-like work. In the late 19th century, in England, workers would work 12 hours a day, 7 hours a week, right? But everybody has well, I'm not sure about that, but essentially everybody had a workplace, poorly paid, hard slave-like work, but there was no unemployment. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't quote me for this because I'm not quite sure if there was no unemployment at that time. But those who advocate for let us be many on earth, because if we reduce our consumption, then we can make our living sustainable. So this is a thing to say, well, let us be many and all of us live uh, a life in poverty. Let us all be poor, right? Because this is essentially reducing our consumption. Like how much you can reduce your consumption. I mean, do you want to live on an earth where you would enjoy your life, or just live without any, being able to travel anywhere, or not having a car, or living like people used to live about 100 years ago? Okay,
So as
so
as
just
sorry, go ahead.
let me just finish my idea about how to deal with this transition period from high population to lower population, and deal with this ratio of elderly. So what I would say, that it's good that new technology can make production more efficient, but we need policies to make sure that it doesn't displace people or make people poorer. Like recently I read that in some countries, Iceland is, I think, the most recent, and maybe Denmark, if I'm not wrong, they moved to actually a 4-week day of work. So what I'm saying is that actually, if the technology would become so much productive, we could all have not only a 4 work day, but 3 work day, maybe 2 work day, right? 2 days a week to work, but each of us would have a workplace. So I work only 2 days, but you also work the next 2 days, and somebody else works the next 2 days in the week. So every day of the week, somebody works, right? But our work would be so productive that the wage that I'm paid for working only 2 days would be enough to sustain my family and for me to live a decent life. I was talking about the beginnings of industrial revolution when everybody was working 12 hours a day and so on. Well, since then, actually, we see that the work week has been shortened. So now
No.
we don't work, I don't know how much was that, 7 times 12 or about 80 um, hours of work a week. Now we work half of that.
Yeah.
And this was possible, well, kind of ironically, because of technology improvement, but also because of our discovery of fossil fuels
Mm-hmm.
and new energy. And this relationship between, better standard of living and fossil fuels is again, I'm sorry, saying ironically because we know over the past 200 years we've seen so much improvement in our standard of living, and this actually allowed population on Earth to increase at this pace, but at the same time burning, borrowing our way of life. We have been, since the discovery of fossil fuels, we've been living beyond our means on this planet. And
Yeah.
now, actually, why the increase in population might be so uh, why am I saying that we are too many? Well, I don't know, probably many of your listeners, because somebody who listens uh, to us now is probably interested in these topics. So probably many of our listeners would know these figures, but I think they are worth repeating. In year 800, 1800, so 1800, the Earth population was 1 billion. So only 200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us, humans like us, Homo sapiens, it took us about 200, sorry, 2,000, 2,500 thousands of years to get to this number on Earth, right? And then since 1800 to 1930, so in only 130 years, the population on Earth doubled. So in
Right.
1930, it was 2 billion. And then in only 70 years, right, it tripled. So in year 2000, we were 6 billion. And only over the past 24 years, Earth population increased by another 2 billion.
Yeah.
So now we are 8.2. So it's absolutely unprecedented, this increase in population. And some say that it was only possible because of the discovery of fossil fuels, but this is a finite resource, so it has to end at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about advancing artificial intelligence so that we could address some of the gaps in the workforce or the services provided to the entire population as the population declines. Do you think there would also be a need for a universal basic income, or do you think living wages would just be re-engineered to accommodate the work week that you described, or how do you think that would come together?
Yeah, so I think that a universal, uh, well, minimum revenue um, and paying wages that that would be sufficient for living um, are somehow substitutes. So I think that we need both because one extreme would be that okay, so we should shorten the number of hours worked per week so that everybody has a chance to get a job and being well paid, right? So this doesn't mean that we should lower wages. But you might think, well, but not everybody is qualified, for these kind of jobs, or not everybody is able to work. There is always this discussion of discrepancy between mostly blue collar jobs being replaced by technology and so on, by robots and so on. So yes, in this transition period that might actually last for 50 years, right?
Hmm.
Between high population and lower population. Um, so both of them could be useful. Actually, a whole range of policies could be employed. But one of them that I don't think people seriously discuss, which I think is even would be even easier to be accepted, is to pay wages for less work that would be enough for living an acceptable, so having an acceptable standard of living. And of course, for those who cannot work or need more time to retrain, or simply they are too old to retrain,
Mhm.
and don't find even those jobs, um, you know, paying guaranteed income would be one solution. Or another solution would be just, to still allow people to have uh, to be in jobs that um, normally would not be very productive. And neoclassical economics would say that, well, your wage is equal to your marginal product. So if you are not productive, then your wage must be low. But that is, I think, is wrong in the context of this discussion of ours. Instead of having somebody stay home and actually getting depressed
Mhm.
and all kind of health issues that come with unemployment, and feeling guilty that you are entertained, you are paid for doing nothing and so on, right? Why not allow these people who are not yet um, able to find a highly productive job, while still have some lower productive job, but pay them above their marginal product, or above their productivity, right?
Yeah.
And this, I think, uh, we see it here. I mean, productivity is just a number, which depends on the level of wages in a country, right? So, like prices, productivity depends on prices, and prices also are just numbers, could be higher or lower depending on how valuable is your currency, uh, right? So even now we see that we pay, for instance, uh, somebody who doesn't do a very productive job in terms of physical units of final product that they produce. We pay wages that in Canada are 3 or 4 times more than they are in China.
Hmm.
Right? This is the whole discussion about bringing manufacturing back to the United States or to Canada. Well, you bring it back, but who is willing to work in the United States for $2 an hour, like the
Right.
Chinese workers do? Well, it's not because the Americans would be lazy, but because $2 an hour wouldn't be enough for them to live in the United States.
Right.
It would be enough for them to live in China, but not here. So you have to pay them a wage that allows them to live in a country that has a high standard of living.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to make sure I ask you a couple more questions before we wrap. But one of the things I was curious about is how you think about the kind of the labor dynamic between countries, and also how we're preparing the next generation for this future that has a lot of uncertainty in it, and how you think about both training economists to communicate what's happening, and also educating students for jobs that don't exist yet.
Again, that's an excellent question because I'm afraid I don't have a good answer to that. Because being an economist, I cannot notice that we economists tend to be very resistant to changing our paradigm. From wage is equal to marginal product kind of thing to broaden our views and to see that actually we need to be more how to say um, to allow that even people who are not very productive to live a decent life. So this means that we should be willing to actually adapt more our theories to the reality of AI and improvements in technology. Of course, economic models included somehow technology in their models, since the Solow model and so on. But they are so these models are so how to put it theoretical,
Mm,
uh,
yeah.
like any model uh, for being tractable, as we economists tend to call them. I mean, equations that can be solved with a pencil on paper. They have to be overly simplified. But our world now is very far from being that simple anymore,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I wonder what you would think about adding to um, the training of an economist, teaching complexity and uh, more data science and more real world, like sustainability and energy economics and ecological economics. It seems like what you just said really resonated with me, that a lot of this is theoretical right now. And I remember Herman Daly said something like the economy is a subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around.
exactly.
Um, and so
Yeah.
just understanding the complexity of the environment and how the economy is influenced by that, and also population dynamics and so many things that need to be integrated into the thinking of economics.
I'm absolutely in favor of that. And, I've done a little bit of research in teaching the way we teach economics students. And because, I teach in an undergraduate university. And I think that even at undergraduate level, we economists tend to teach economics in the same dry and sort of an ivory tower kind of ways, uh, being proud of our mathematical skills. And this pride goes back to, to um, uh, people who actually made economics more mathematical than it ever was. Some people would say that envying, the physicists. and so on. But I think we should move beyond this for our pride and try maybe to embrace AI, um, which actually now can do very much of this technical part, like coding, like even solving theoretical models. It can be, it can do that. Software like Mathematica, which I think, as far as I remember, it was first to do this symbolic calculations and so on. So we economists should now be more like uh, those who create ideas rather than wasting much of our lives learning how to code and learning how to solve sophisticated dynamic general equilibrium models.
Hmm.
Because the AI can do that, can do this now, but AI doesn't have these ideas, at least not yet, and at least AI doesn't have the power, the ability to convince people and to get people on board with these new ideas. So this is what I think economists' role, the new role of economists should be, to be able to manage, to handle AI in order to, create new results, new ideas um, in terms of, solving this kind of problems that you mentioned. How do we pass over this transition period between high growth in population towards decrease in population or low population growth? So how do we handle these things? So economists should use AI to its highest potential, but at the same time uh, bring these results to the public and convince people that look, there is a problem and we have a solution to that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to stop, but I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'll share this on YouTube, and we can keep the conversation going.
Well, yeah, it was a pleasure actually talking to you. It's no, not every day that you can find people who would be willing to listen to your obsessions.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the conversation. So I'm just going to stop recording, and then we can talk a little bit more.
Sure, it was nice talking to you.